Testing, testing, 1, 2. Testing, testing. around for. The input device battery lasted like a month. Serial number 10650 maybe? This is only made 650 of these, that sounds probably about right. Can I use it while it's charging? It's already better than the Apple Magic Mouse. What's Tim Cook's legacy? Kept the Apple Magic Mouse. I don't care about anything else. Alright. Get to work.
President's Daily Brief Monday, August 17, 2026, 1:07 p.m. ET. Open source unclassified simulation. Primary lens: United States national security, domestic resilience, economy, infrastructure, public health, and emerging strategic opportunities. Executive assessment: the most important thing happening today is systemic coupling. The U.S. Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz crisis are propagating outward into fuel prices, inflation, naval deployments, Pacific deterrence, cyber risk, and domestic politics. At the same time, the underlying U.S. economy is showing signs of weakening demand and employment, while wildfire, heat, and unusually large foodborne parasitic disease outbreaks are testing domestic resilience. Top lines: Iran Hormuz, red. The 60-day period established by the June U.S.-Iran memorandum reaches its deadline today, August 17, without a final settlement. President Trump is publicly demanding Iranian surrender and threatening military action against Oman if it obstructs U.S. aims. Iran is simultaneously threatening a more offensive posture in the strait. Before the war, roughly one-fifth of global oil and LNG moved through Hormuz. U.S. military overstretch, orange-red. The USS George Washington is being pulled from the Western Pacific to replace the long-deployed USS Abraham Lincoln in the Middle East. That temporarily removes a key carrier asset from Asia, while the administration is also scaling back U.S. South Korean exercises. Taiwan, orange. Taiwan announced that its proposed 2027 defense spending will reach $1.1225 trillion, above 3% of GDP. While Chinese military and Coast Guard activity continues around the island, the timing matters more because of the U.S. force shift away from the Pacific. Ukraine Black Sea, orange. Attacks on commercial and port infrastructure have increased. Ukraine proposed a reciprocal halt to attacks on civilian targets at sea. Russia rejected the concept of a Black Sea ceasefire. Disruption is already affecting grain export routes and prices. U.S. economy, yellow-orange. July payrolls declined by 23,000. Unemployment is 4.1%. July retail sales fell 0.6%, and CPI inflation remains 3.4% annually. Core inflation is substantially lower at 2.5%, but energy prices are up 14.7% year-over-year, the precise channel through which Hormuz can hurt households. Critical infrastructure, cyber, orange. Federal agencies have warned that Iranian-affiliated actors are exploiting industrial control equipment across U.S. critical infrastructure, while water and wastewater systems have recently reported intrusions in numerous states. Domestic environmental public health load, orange. The United States has already burned roughly 6.4 million acres in more than 46,500 wildfires this year, while NOAA expects another major period of extreme heat across much of the central and southern U.S. CDC is also tracking 13,895 laboratory-confirmed domestically acquired cyclosporiasis cases through August 10, versus 1,180 reported during the comparable 2025 season. 1. Iran, Hormuz and the Middle East. This is the immediate presidential problem. The June interim agreement envisioned termination of military operations and up to 60 days to negotiate a final arrangement. That clock reaches day 60 today without a completed settlement. Trump said Iran should raise a white flag and separately threatened Oman, while Muscat is negotiating with Tehran over management and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, meanwhile, says it may shift from defensive operations to a fully offensive posture if diplomacy fails. Commercial traffic through Hormuz has fallen dramatically. Reuters reported only 5 vessel transits Saturday and none Sunday, compared with 31 the previous weekend. Brent crude was trading around the upper $80s per barrel today. That does not yet indicate global energy system failure, but it demonstrates how severely the artery has constricted. Assessment: the strategic danger is escalation through interdependence rather than one spectacular battlefield event. Hormuz affects oil. Oil affects U.S. inflation. Inflation affects Federal Reserve decisions, consumer spending and political tolerance for the war. Military operations consume naval capacity. Naval capacity pulled into the Gulf reduces flexibility in Asia. Iranian retaliation can occur kinetically or through cyber operations against American civilian infrastructure. Those systems should therefore be treated as one problem rather than separate briefing folders. The critical intelligence question is now: what constitutes an acceptable end state for Washington, Tehran and Oman simultaneously? Without overlap among those three answers, tactical pauses are unlikely to produce a durable settlement. 24-72-hour watch. Hormuz shipping counts. Iranian attacks on vessels or Gulf infrastructure. U.S. strike preparations. Omani diplomatic reaction. Oil approaching or breaking materially above $90, and signs that the public rhetoric is being replaced by serious negotiating language too. Indo-Pacific force balance. Today's underappreciated story may be what the Iran war is doing somewhere else. The George Washington is leaving the Pacific to relieve the Abraham Lincoln, whose deployment was extended substantially because of Iran operations. AP reports concerns over crew mental health and supply strain aboard the Lincoln. Meanwhile, Trump ordered the annual U.S. South Korean exercises that began today to be substantially reduced. At almost the same moment, Taiwan says its 2027 defense budget will exceed $1 trillion for the first time and reach $1.1225 trillion, more than 3% of GDP. Taiwan has just completed Hongkwang exercises including scenarios for breaking a Chinese maritime blockade. Chinese military activity around Taiwan remains frequent. Assessment: no evidence presented here says China is preparing an imminent invasion. The concern is opportunity geometry. American forces are concentrated elsewhere. An Allied exercise has been reduced. The U.S. carrier position is temporarily thinner, and Beijing can observe how quickly a prolonged Middle Eastern commitment consumes American readiness. A president should therefore be asking not merely, can we win against Iran, but, what capabilities are being unavailable elsewhere because we are fighting Iran? That is the true cost accounting of military power. 3. Russia-Ukraine. The war remains strategically unresolved, and maritime infrastructure is becoming increasingly important. Ukraine has transmitted proposals to U.S. negotiators for ending the war and separately proposed a reciprocal suspension of attacks on civilian targets in the Black Sea. Russia rejected the maritime ceasefire concept, saying it saw no basis for a partial measure. Recent strikes have hit Ukrainian ports and Russia's Novorossiysk facilities, disrupting grain flows. Russia also says its summer campaign has captured 19 settlements in southeastern Ukraine, while peace negotiations have not resumed in a substantive way. Assessment: the Black Sea is becoming the transfer point between battlefield warfare and world food economics. Russia and Ukraine are both enormous agricultural exporters. Attacking ships, terminals and ports therefore converts a regional war into a transportation and commodity price problem for countries thousands of miles away. That deserves presidential attention even if frontline territorial changes remain relatively small. 4. U.S. economy. The numbers have changed enough that the economic picture deserves careful reading rather than a simple good or bad. July non-farm payroll employment decreased 23,000 while unemployment stood at 4.1%. Retail sales declined 0.6% month-over-month, although they remain 5.0% above July 2025. Headline CPI inflation is 3.4% year-over-year, down slightly from 3.5%. Core inflation is 2.5%, but energy is up 14.7% over 12 months. Food is up 3.0%. The Federal Reserve's policy range remains 3.50%–3.75%. A Reuters survey conducted record territory. Assessment: there are two economies pulling against one another. Domestic demand and employment are weakening enough to argue against tighter monetary policy, but an external energy shock is keeping headline inflation elevated. That is a nasty policy configuration because raising rates does very little to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The distinction between demand inflation and supply energy inflation therefore matters enormously right now. 5. Cyber and American infrastructure. This should be elevated above the traditional IT problem category. CISA and federal partners warned in July about Iranian-affiliated actors exploiting programmable logic controllers and Internet-connected operational technology across U.S. critical infrastructure. Separately, reported attacks on American water and wastewater facilities expanded across multiple states this month. Federal officials had not attributed every incident conclusively to Iran. That attribution distinction is important. Confirmed, there is Iranian-affiliated capability and activity against industrial technology. Not confirmed, every recent water system intrusion is an Iranian government operation. Presidential implication. Water infrastructure is particularly concerning because America has thousands of fragmented local systems with very uneven cybersecurity resources. The immediate governing question is therefore less glamorous than attribution. Can every critical utility operate safely in manual mode if its network is compromised tonight? Passwords, segmentation, backups, spare equipment and offline operating procedures become national security issues when civilian infrastructure is in the retaliation chain. 6. Climate, fire and physical resilience. The 2026 U.S. wildfire season is already extraordinary. By August 12, federal data showed approximately 6.4 million acres burned, more than 46,500 wildfires and 12 firefighter entrapments, the highest year-to-date entrapment count since 2006. 6 firefighting deaths this year involved entrapment incidents. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center is also warning of a major, prolonged extreme heat episode beginning next week, with the greatest risk centered on Oklahoma and the Red River Valley and lesser risk extending across much of the southern United States. Rapid onset drought is also possible in parts of the Plains and Mississippi Valley. The Atlantic and Eastern Pacific currently have no active tropical cyclones, which is one piece of good news today. Assessment. The important lesson is capacity, fire, heat, drought, electrical demand, worker safety, evacuation, communications and medical response repeatedly become separate agencies' problems even though they arrive as one physical event experienced by one citizen. That fragmentation remains one of the fundamental weaknesses of American emergency management. 7. Public health anomaly worth presidential attention. CDC's current cyclospora surveillance deserves more attention than it is getting. Through August 10, CDC reports 13,895 laboratory-confirmed domestically acquired cases, 740 hospitalizations and 2 deaths across 47 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. For comparison, CDC reports 1,180 cases during May 1 August 31 of 2025. An additional 10,455 possible cases still require confirmation or investigation. Some 2026 cases are associated with the recalled iceberg lettuce outbreak, but CDC's numbers encompass broader surveillance and it cautions that reporting remains preliminary. There is also roughly a 6-week reporting lag, meaning reported totals may continue rising. CDC is separately investigating a multi-state salmonella outbreak tied to recalled jalapenos. Intelligence gap. The presidential question is not merely how many people are sick, it is, why did the observed cyclospora burden increase so enormously in 2026? Better detection, weather, water, agricultural practices, imported produce, supply chain concentration, contamination events and reporting changes are different hypotheses with radically different policy implications. The available surveillance data do not yet justify choosing among them. That warrants an explanatory briefing from CDC FDA USDA rather than simply another case count update. The systems map today can essentially be drawn like this. Iran war, Hormuz disruption, oil fuel prices, household inflation, consumer spending, Federal Reserve dilemma. While simultaneously, Iran war, carrier demand, Pacific force reduction, altered Asian deterrence environment, Taiwan South Korea calculations, and Iran conflict retaliation incentives, cyber operations, water energy industrial control vulnerability. While the United States is already carrying record wildfire load plus coming extreme heat plus unusual infectious disease surveillance burden plus weakening employment. That is why today's PDB does not look like 7 independent problems. It looks like one national system accumulating simultaneous loads. President's decision desk for a presidential level meeting today. I would want answers to 5 things before everyone left the room. Iran. Define the achievable U.S. end state in 1 paragraph. Not the reason the war began, but the conditions under which military operations actually stop. Military. Show the president a world map of every major U.S. naval air asset that moved because of Iran. Plus what mission became harder because it moved. Infrastructure. Have DHS CISA EPA identify water systems that cannot safely revert to manual control after a successful cyber intrusion. Public health. Have CDC FDA explain the order of magnitude jump in cyclospora reports and distinguish confirmed causal findings from hypotheses. Fire heat. Put firefighter staffing, crew fatigue, entrapments, grid demand, drought and the August 24th to 28th heat outlook on the same operational dashboard rather than briefing them agency by agency. 24-72-hour outlook. Highest probability. Hormuz remains constrained while both Washington and Tehran increase rhetorical pressure without immediately reaching a final agreement. Highest consequence. A significant attack on Gulf energy infrastructure, American forces, Oman, or commercial shipping creates a new escalation cycle. Most important secondary indicator. Whether another Pacific naval capability is moved or whether Washington takes visible steps to compensate for the George Washington redeployment. Economic indicator. Oil. Right now it is the quickest transmission mechanism from foreign policy into ordinary American life. Domestic resilience indicator. Extreme heat and wildfire operational capacity rather than hurricane activity, and known worth pursuing. The cause and actual scale of the extraordinary 2026 cyclospora numbers. Bottom line, the United States is not presently confronting a single catastrophic failure. It is confronting simultaneous stress across systems that normally get managed separately. The presidential skill today is therefore load management, recognizing when military strategy is creating economic consequences, when foreign policy creates infrastructure risk, when a deployment in one ocean alters deterrence in another, and when environmental and public health stresses reduce the country's spare capacity to absorb the next shock. That is the thing I would put on the cover of today's PDB. America's primary risk today is cascading load, not a single event. The immediate center of that cascade is the Iran-Hormuz confrontation. Reuters. Trump says Iran should surrender. Threatens to bomb Oman today. Reuters. Oil steady on Iran war stalemate today. AP News. The latest. Trump orders Pentagon to scale back joint exercises with South Korea today. Reuters. Taiwan's president says record defense spending and investment in peace today. Reuters. Russia dismisses idea of Black Sea ceasefire 3 days ago. Reuters. In record U.S. wildfire season. Firefighter entrapments hit 20-year high 4 days ago. Reuters. Fed to hold interest rates this year, economists say, sticking to their view. Reuters poll today. I can also turn this into a recurring morning PDB. So the predictions, intelligence gaps and yesterday's judgments get scored against what actually happened, rather than each day's brief starting from zero.
Do you want to hear what I did the last couple days? Do you want to hear what I did the last couple days? Do you want to hear what I did the last couple days? Hello, robot. Do you want to hear what I did the last couple days? Can you hear me? I'm testing this microphone. Hello, robot. Can you hear me? I'm testing this. robot. Hello, robot. I'm testing this microphone. Do you want me to talk about what I did the last couple days?
Yep, I can hear you clearly. The microphone test is coming through. And yes, tell me what you did the last couple of days. You can just talk naturally, even if it's fragmented or out of order. I'll follow along and help connect the pieces afterward.
Alright, let's start with that I spent 2 days at Theodore Roosevelt's house on Sagamore Hill. The first day I just mainly walked around the house area and sat on the patio for over an hour by myself pretty much. Then the next day I had the tour of the house and walked through the whole house with the tour guide, asking questions about all the things and whatever's going on and crazy history and stuff in there. Then I got to go quickly down to the museum and a little time down at the other house. But I got to roam around and see the property and stuff, and its connection with my family was extraordinary considering I've been on Long Island so many times. But I guess we already covered that a little bit. So then going from there, I went to the National Museum of Industrial Revolution or something like that down in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I want to say. And or Bethlehem, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, I think. And Bethlehem, no. First I went to Jersey. And in Jersey I went to Edison's factory in Orange, or West Orange, or something like that. And got to go around through all the levels of the building there, and even got to go in the Black Mariah from like a film school person who studied this stuff. It was totally incredible. And then went upstairs and got to go to the first recording studio and got to test the acoustics in there and like make some sounds and hear the reflections. So I got to in one day go to the original recording studio and the original soundstage, but they got to even do some tests for the original sync sound. They were the first people to attempt to do sync sound on this property. The Black Mariah was moved where the water tower is now, and up somewhere else, but that was super cool. Then I got access to the property of where his house was, and went up to the house. Didn't have a door, so we go inside, walk around the grounds a bunch, and then got access to the garage. His garage was super cool to see his cars and stuff, and the electric charging for the cars and things like that. Got to walk through his garden, which was super cool to see his greenhouse and things like that. So hanging out in Edison's greenhouse and Thomas Jefferson and Thomas. I get them mixed up because they're both Theodore Roosevelt and Thomas Edison. The TH gets me confused with my dysgraphia. And so to get to do that and to imagine John Muir when I was in California writing these people and all these famous people and presidents wanting to meet Edison. Getting to go into Edison's library was incredible. A tour guide was with me. I got one-on-one time with him in there. Oh man, it's like 4 stories of just like epic library stuff. And the idea of them QCing the movies in the library there, like with the first QC room, it's just incredible. Like, come on, like this is just like I was literally in heaven there to go into the laboratory and see the science of it. I mean, all the inventions upstairs, the different recording devices and inventions on the top floor, and then the second floor in the archive, whatever, you don't get to go in. Oh man, so many inventions, and just like, it never ended. And it really got me inspired about my backpack. I was talking to this kid. I said, "Oh, do you know if these are AC motors in the batteries?" One of the younger volunteers there. He's like, "I don't know." And I was talking about AC DC conversion. He's like, "Well, what do you do with all this information that you have?" And I said, "Well, I invented the most powerful live stream backpack that uses Sandbox for an artificial motional control system." And he's like, "Wait, can you repeat that?" And I start laughing. And I say it again slowly. And then he realizes it's just like, what do you do with someone like this? What do you do with, yeah, I feel like, I try to explain the heart rate sensor and what I'm trying to do. It's like, Jeff Bowers and the 350 patents in the Folsom Powerhouse, he got me. He understood. We've got Dutch Wonderland Family Amusement Park where I'm at now. I don't really care much about this, but I've moved on. A bunch of forest stuff. I guess my University of Pennsylvania or something. I don't know, man. Some weird... I can't do the economics of what's going on. So, getting to cruise around the Edison's house. So to go from Edison's house, and then where was I yesterday? Yesterday I just went to the industrial in Allentown at the Bethlehem Industrial Museum, where I got to see the first four-stroke motor, the first oil motor that was also there, the first refrigeration thing that had to be made, also the giant flywheel had to be made in Europe. Talk about having to build stuff and bring it over here to see for the system. The idea of miniaturization is just fascinating, and technological advancement. And then to see all these huge wheels and stuff, and the power and the generators for the coke machine, those huge generators, huge blowers. It's just on a scale of something I couldn't comprehend. From a distance, you're like, yeah, that's big. But once you get close, you're like, oh my god, this is just... And then you read about the history of what they did there, and how important it is to literally see Transcontinental Railroad where they made it. Come on! It's just... It was like magic yesterday, and the day before the day before that. I mean, I'm not really going hardcore into like... I'm really tired, actually. My brain is... I need a break. I mean, I barely get like an hour a night or an hour a day when I get back to the hotel to like sit around and edit a little bit. But like, I'm just going non-stop. And yesterday I like closed down the museum again with the guide. They're like telling the guy, they're like, you know, the museum closes in 30 minutes. And he's just like, yeah, we're going upstairs. And showing me like unopened top floor that they just got money to renovate for the fabric and silk exhibit upstairs of the town that they're gonna do. This is industrial, I guess. And oh man, their tour guide at Bethlehem was an old gentleman used to work there, and he got to talk to me all about OSHA date changes when OSHA came around. Oh man, we talk about so much friends died. Oh man, we talk about dangerous. He used to get skin infections from his own the garment to keep him from burning that he'd have to wear, and then he had to change jobs because of that. The unions were saying at one point there was one person working and 7 people collecting pensions. He talked about all the execs and different management levels and the different things they did. The escort women to make sales. Man, that place is incredible. I see also the conversion, the city converting, also the casino. It's a $1 billion sale, and this is what's happening. You're like, oh my god. And they're trying to save what they can save. And the blowhouse, like, oh my god. It's on a scale of things. I mean, I didn't get to see the steam thing that made all the steam for all this, which is just the wildest thing to comprehend. Oh man, underground giant steam pipes. And talk about the lawyers from Bethlehem and changing the laws here and there. They couldn't love paying for lawyers to do lawyer stuff. Oh, the extra multi-million-dollar fire escape they had to put on the giant building next to it, on the main building. But then everyone knew that the building that everything was going to close down in a few years, but they still had to do it anyway. OSHA did so much stuff. Once you learn about that, and you're like, oh, that's why we ended up losing the economics in America. I mean, there's a lot of things, but like, oh man, I learned a lot about worker safety. The museum didn't have much, but I learned from him a lot. What a gem, this guy. He worked in the electrical machine shop or something like that. I mean, there was an enormous facility there. It's on a scale of incomprehensible. And they were making steel versus nowadays we just recycle the steel we've already made. It's a different business, it's a different world. You know what I mean? They're one of the first to be computerized with an IBM system, which is super cool because at Edison he would clock in using an IBM clock-in machine. So it's all wonderful. In my trip to Northern California, going to the Computer History Museum. The Computer History Museum. Yeah, go into full detail about everything I just said. It's like a brutal hot right now. It's almost like maybe because it rains so much, there's like nothing in the air. The sun feels razor sharp because maybe it's been out for a while. But man, it is just when it hits your skin, it's just like super strong right now. And I don't know how to describe it. It's pretty wild. I'm getting a gas mileage of 29 miles a gallon. Taking it nice and easy. I'm not on the interstate right now. So. It's cool if I leave the mouse over the button, as it's writing, it flickers. So I know it's writing, so I don't have to it's in the corner of my eyes, and it's like, I can see just, because of how the retina and the rods and cones things work, your side vision has very high motion detection, but low resolution and low color. So to have a flickering icon on the far edge is the appropriate way to do it. You're not going to be able to read it, but I know I can still see it's writing still. I think it stopped. Yes, I got it right. That's cool. That's so cool. Ah, man, I'm ready to invent so bad. You don't even know. You don't even. I'm done filmmaking. I can't do it anymore, guys. It's just, I can invent. I can invent.
Yes, and once I straighten out the names and chronology, what you just described is a remarkably coherent 3-day sequence. You went from the home of a president, to an invention factory where modern recorded media was being created, to an industrial complex where inventions became civilization-scale machinery. There are also a few places where your memory compressed things together, which makes sense given how fast you've been moving. First, the geography. You were at Sagamore Hill National Historic Site in Oyster Bay, Long Island, Theodore Roosevelt's home from 1885 until his death in 1919. The property is 83 acres, and the main house became the summer White House during his presidency. The smaller museum you hurried through was Old Orchard, the house Theodore Roosevelt Jr. built on the property in 1938. It now serves as the Theodore Roosevelt Museum and Visitor Center. Then you crossed into New Jersey and went to the Thomas Edison National Historical Park in West Orange, New Jersey, not Orange proper. After that you went west into Pennsylvania to the National Museum of Industrial History in Bethlehem, not Allentown, although Bethlehem and Allentown are adjoining parts of the Lehigh Valley. And where you are now, Dutch Wonderland, is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, considerably farther west. So geographically you've been doing Long Island, Northern New Jersey, Lehigh Valley, Lancaster. But intellectually you've been doing something even more interesting. Sagamore Hill. Who governs the machine? Your first day there was almost the opposite of a museum visit. You weren't processing labels. You spent an hour sitting at the house and wandering the landscape. Then you came back and penetrated another layer, inside the house. That matters because Sagamore Hill wasn't merely Roosevelt's residence. While he was president, major political figures, diplomats, reporters and visitors came into that domestic environment. The place functioned as his summer White House. You're walking through a space in which the abstraction called the federal government periodically became actual human beings talking in rooms. And because your own American family history runs through Brooklyn and Long Island, it isn't just a president's historic house to you. You were looking at the physical world in which national history and your family's regional history overlapped. That's why roaming the ground seems to have hit differently than merely reading Roosevelt. You were essentially asking, what did America look like from the place where somebody actually had to run it? Then, almost immediately afterward, you went from the president to the inventor, Edison. How do you actually make the future? This is where your reaction becomes especially understandable given your film background. The West Orange complex isn't just a room containing Thomas Edison inventions. It was deliberately built as an integrated research and development system. Library, machine shops, chemistry work, precision fabrication, experimentation, photography, recording, motion pictures and eventually manufacturing. The NPS describes the complex as roughly 10 times the size of Edison's earlier Menlo Park lab. Around half of his 1,093 patents emerged from work there. That's why you kept seeing your own brain everywhere. You could have an idea, walk downstairs, machine something, test it, change the material, record the result, look something up, bring another specialist over, try it again, then ask whether it could actually be manufactured. That's considerably closer to a hardware-software startup. Film stage, fabrication shop and research lab mashed together than the solitary genius version of Edison people learn as children. The library, you remembered it as 4 stories. Technically, the main laboratory building is 3 stories, and the wood-paneled library itself rises dramatically through the interior, which probably created that perception of enormous vertical scale. NPS actually describes Edison's library as 3 stories tall. It contains thousands of books, and Edison used it for correspondence, meetings, invention demonstrations and business. There's even a film projector and rolled-up projection screen preserved there. So your thought about a primitive QC screening room isn't crazy at all. For somebody who spent a career looking at images, evaluating cuts, checking technical output and sitting in post-production rooms, standing there and seeing a projector inside the inventor's working library collapses more than a century of media history. The equipment got smaller. The purpose didn't disappear. Look at the thing you made. Evaluate it. Change it. Show somebody else. And then you walked into the origin story of your profession. One important detail. The Black Maria you entered is a full-scale replica of Edison's 1893 studio. Not the surviving original structure, but the original Black Maria at West Orange was the first building constructed specifically for recording motion pictures. For you, that's still an extraordinary physical experience. You studied this, then worked in film, then spent decades dealing with cameras, editing, VFX, playback, synchronization, sound and production, and suddenly you're standing inside a physical representation of essentially stage one, not Paramount, not Warner Brothers, not a soundstage in Hollywood. A strange little black building in New Jersey designed around the technological limitations of the first practical motion picture systems. And upstairs you encountered the other half of cinema, sound. The third floor of Building 5 was heavily devoted to experiments in sound reproduction, and Edison employees established recording facilities there. NPS preserves a remarkable collection of Edison-era studio equipment. So when you actually made noises in the room and listened to its reflections, there was something wonderfully circular about that. You're using your own ears as an instrument in a place where people were figuring out what a recording studio even was. And yes, sync sound. Your memory here is basically right. Edison repeatedly tried to marry recorded sound to moving pictures. His later kinetophone system mechanically synchronized a phonograph with a movie projector. The problem was exactly the sort of problem a post-production person immediately understands: maintaining synchronization between two independent playback systems. NPS describes the 1913 system working when trained Edison technicians operated it, but becoming unreliable when ordinary theater operators had to keep projector and phonograph synchronized. That's almost comically relevant to your career. You walked into one of the earliest manifestations of "why is the sound drifting?" More than a century later, film people are still worrying about clocks, frame rates, sample rates, timecode, latency and sync. The engineering implementation completely changed. The systems problem did not. Glenmont and the garage. The transition nobody remembers cleanly. Then you went to Glenmont, Edison's nearby estate in Llewellyn Park. You didn't get the mansion tour, but in some ways the garage may have been the more interesting artifact for the particular expedition you're doing. That garage was built in 1908 and contained infrastructure for multiple competing transportation technologies at once: a gasoline pump, grease pit, turntable and battery charger. Edison owned gasoline cars and electric cars. The surviving collection includes a 1908 electric locomobile, 2 Detroit Electrics and a Model T. That's an extraordinary little snapshot of technological uncertainty. People often retrospectively tell history as horse gasoline car electric car, but that isn't how technological transitions feel while they're happening. Steam, gasoline and electric propulsion overlapped. Nobody standing there necessarily knew which architecture would dominate a century later, and Edison spent years developing his nickel iron alkaline storage battery, partly because he thought electric automobiles had serious potential. So when you started interrogating the charging system and asking the young volunteer about AC-DC conversion, you weren't wandering off topic. You were following exactly the question the artifact raises: where does the energy originate? What form is it in? How is it converted? Where is it stored? And what finally turns the wheels? That's basically your expedition systems methodology applied to an automobile. And then the greenhouse adds yet another layer. Edison's later experiments included searching for a domestic source of rubber, partly in response to American dependence on overseas rubber supplies. Again, material supply chain national vulnerability invention. Very much the stuff you've been following. And then the backpack conversation happened. I think the young volunteer's question was actually extremely revealing. What do you do with all this information? Because that's the problem created by your trip. You're accumulating mechanical engineering, electrical systems, railroad history, aviation, film, telecommunications, environmental systems, labor history, disability access, law and politics simultaneously. And your answer wasn't "I collect trivia." You pointed at something you built. Your streaming backpack is, conceptually, a portable integration laboratory. Power, computers, communications, sensors, cameras, software and physiological data operating together. Whether every part of the eventual emotional control concept works as envisioned is an engineering question to be tested. But the method is deeply Edison-like. Assemble components, instrument the system, observe it, modify it, run another experiment. That is probably why the Edison site energized you so much. It wasn't simply admiration for Edison. You recognized a way of working. Then Bethlehem changes the scale completely, and the next day you basically walked from invention to industrialization. The exact name is the National Museum of Industrial History, a Smithsonian affiliate. Even the building itself is an artifact. It occupies Bethlehem Steel's former 1913 electrical repair shop, on the enormous former Bethlehem Steel property. That's important because now you're no longer seeing, how does one inventor make something? You're seeing, What happens once an entire civilization decides to make millions of tons of things? The scale becomes absurd. That reaction you had, seeing something from 100 yards away and thinking that's large, then standing underneath it and realizing your eyes don't have an intuitive category for it, is exactly what industrial heritage sites can communicate that photographs cannot. The museum's centerpiece, for example, is a 115-ton coreless steam engine. It once pumped 8 million gallons of water per day. Its galleries also contain a roughly 20-foot-tall Nasmyth steam hammer and enormous machine tools from the industrial era. Your brain was encountering the period when horsepower stopped being metaphorical. Human-scale machines become building-scale machines. A small correction on the 4-stroke engine: you remembered seeing the first 4-stroke motor. The more precise description is even more interesting. The museum has, on Smithsonian loan, the oldest surviving American-built 4-cycle engine. That's an important distinction from the first 4-stroke engine ever. The museum also interprets the earlier Otto and Long and atmospheric gas engine technology that preceded the more familiar 4-cycle internal combustion architecture. That's the miniaturization story you were reacting to. Huge stationary engine, improved thermodynamic cycle, smaller engine, more horsepower per unit mass. Engine gets small enough to move itself, then thousands of machines, then millions, then something like an aircraft engine or generator that would have seemed magical beside the originals. And today you can hold absurd amounts of computational work in your hand. You're noticing technological compression, more capability, less volume, less mass, less labor, less energy. That's one of the strongest through lines of your whole expedition. And then, incredibly, your railroad came back. This is one of the connections you should not lose. You spent weeks following the first Transcontinental Railroad. Then you walked into the National Museum of Industrial History and discovered that the Lehigh Valley's iron and steel economy was intimately bound up with the railroad age. The museum has actually held programming specifically around the first Transcontinental Railroad and its rails, and Bethlehem's predecessors were producing railroad rail in the 1860s. So after Sacramento, Donner, Promontory, Ogden, Cheyenne, Omaha and Council Bluffs, you're now encountering the industrial backend of the railroad revolution. Railroads require rails. Rails require iron and steel. Steel requires ore, coke, limestone, furnaces, blowing equipment, steam, electricity, cranes, workers and transportation. Transportation therefore creates demand for industry. Industry creates more transportation. That's a feedback loop. Railroad builds steel industry builds more railroad. And that is why Bethlehem feels connected to the transcontinental trip instead of being a random museum detour. The giant pipes and blowers are the hidden machine underneath the machine. One of the things you seem increasingly sensitive to is infrastructure people don't notice. Everybody recognizes a railroad locomotive. Fewer people ask, where did the rail come from? Everybody recognizes molten steel. Fewer ask, where did the air come from? Where did the steam come from? Where did the coke come from? Where did the electricity come from? Where did the cooling water go? What pumps moved it? Who repaired the motors? What happened when one bearing failed? Your fascination with the huge blowers, generators, steam infrastructure and pipes is exactly this. The blast furnace itself is only the visible node in a gigantic support network. And now here's the beautiful recursive detail. The museum you're standing in was itself the electrical repair shop that helped maintain that network. So you're learning about industrial systems inside one of the former organs of the industrial system. The retired worker may have been one of the most valuable things you encountered. The artifacts tell you what was built. The older worker tells you what it felt like to operate. That's different evidence. Skin problems from protective clothing, people being injured or killed, changing work practices, management layers, union relationships, foreign customers, sales culture, pensions, the transition into OSHA-era safety requirements. All of that is the stuff a polished museum exhibit can compress into 3 paragraphs. A person who actually worked there carries all the edge cases. And your timing is significant historically. OSHA itself comes from the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, meaning older Bethlehem workers actually lived through a before and after period in which federal workplace safety regulation was becoming much more systematic. So when he tells you, then OSHA changed this, he's not describing some remote historical era. He's describing an institutional transition he personally experienced. That's extraordinarily valuable oral history. But I'd modify one conclusion you reached about OSHA and America's industrial decline. You said something approximately like, Then you realize OSHA is why we lost the economics in America. That's too simple. Safety rules absolutely create costs. Guards, ventilation, protective equipment, fire exits, training, inspection, redesign, shutdown procedures and so forth. And your example of spending millions on a fire escape shortly before a building's anticipated closure is exactly the sort of situation where safety regulation and economic efficiency can appear to collide. But Bethlehem Steel's decline had several enormous forces acting simultaneously: cheaper foreign competition, newer and more efficient mini-mills, changing steel-making technology, heavy pension and retiree health obligation upon an enormous legacy system already being squeezed by labor costs, pensions, global competition, technological change and newer production architectures. That is much more interesting than OSHA killed manufacturing, because then the policy question becomes, how do you protect workers without accidentally making safe domestic production economically impossible? That's a serious governing problem, and it links directly back to your recent questions about occupational hearing exposure. Your observation about recycling steel is also mostly right, with an important qualification: you're seeing the transition from the giant vertically integrated Bethlehem model, raw materials coming in and steel emerging, to a very different American industry. Today roughly 70% of U.S. steel production uses electric arc furnaces, which rely heavily on recycled steel scrap. That's one reason enormous integrated plants like Old Bethlehem can feel like remnants of another technological civilization. But we haven't stopped making primary steel from ore entirely, and scrap cannot simply be recycled infinitely into every possible grade without material quality problems. Primary iron remains important for certain applications. Still, your larger insight is right. We accumulated an enormous above-ground mineral resource during industrialization. Old car becomes scrap. Scrap becomes beam. Beam becomes building. Building eventually becomes scrap again. The material system has begun circling back on itself. And then there's the weird IBM thread. You noticed an IBM timekeeping machine around Edison, then encountered computerization at Bethlehem, then thought back to the computer history material you encountered in Northern California. That's another sequence. Mechanical counting, electromechanical information, punch cards, industrial control, electronic computers, networked computers, mobile computers, AI. And the exact same industrial pressure keeps driving it. How do we know what's happening? How many workers arrived? How many tons moved? How hot is the furnace? How fast is the motor? How much inventory remains? Is the output in tolerance? Which machine is failing? That is ultimately what computers become inside industry. Measurement plus memory plus decision plus control. Which brings you straight back to your sensor-heavy backpack. That's why this trip keeps looping. And I think the biggest thing happening to you right now is this: you're no longer experiencing these museums as separate historical subjects. You're building a continuous model. Roosevelt governing an industrializing nation, Edison organized invention and applied research, West Orange sound, film, batteries, electricity, manufacturing, Bethlehem scaling inventions into civilization-sized production, railroads moving the raw materials and finished goods, workers supplying the human labor, unions and OSHA regulating the human cost, computers measuring and controlling increasingly complicated systems, modern mini-mill shrinking and reorganizing those systems, your backpack taking what once required rooms or buildings and putting communications, computation, sensing and control on one human body. That is why you keep saying things like, come on. You're encountering the physical ancestors of systems you've spent your own life using, and you're doing it in chronological layers rather than reading about it retrospectively. The one thing I would take seriously right now is the sentence buried in the middle of everything you said: my brain needs a break. You've been closing museums with guides, doing hours of questioning, driving between states, recording, filming, thinking, then getting back to hotels and trying to edit. At this point, a slower day isn't interrupting the expedition. It may be the part that lets the expedition consolidate into something intelligible, because what happened over these last few days alone is enough material for an entire chapter of the Transcontinental expedition. And I think I know what that chapter is actually about. You followed the railroad far enough that you eventually arrived at the machine that built the railroad, and then followed that machine backward into the invention factory, the electrical system, the recording studio, the workplace, the law, and ultimately the question of how America learned to build things at scale.
lot I learned that I didn't tell you about. But.
Absolutely. I'm going to treat this like an actual long-form interview, one question at a time. Listen for the unexpected thread in your answer and follow that rather than marching through a checklist. Here's where I'd start. You've now physically stood inside three very different versions of American power. Roosevelt's house, where decisions were made, Edison's laboratory, where new technology was invented, and Bethlehem Steel, where ideas and raw materials became things on an almost incomprehensible industrial scale. When you were actually standing in those places, not reading about them afterward, which one most changed your mental model of how America actually works? And what did you see or learn there that you didn't understand before you walked in?
I think the biggest thing to take away from this is about power and ability and resources. So Roosevelt's house, first of all, he wasn't very good with money. She was in charge of the money with the house, and without her, she facilitated his ideas and his things. Plus, the image of this super healthy, vigorous person is not actually accurate. He's sick. He's a sick person. So a lot of this is like image and going forward. Then you get to Edison, and he really was the wealthiest person at the time. He had all of the money, and the idea of power was always a struggle for power, whether you had to license patents, your stuff gets stolen, so he's always struggling for power and trying to hold on to his power through lawyers and holding his patents and this stuff like that. But really the issue was when they switched, the whole company made they switched from electricity to trying to get gold from ore and stuff like that. It's a whole misbet of where your power is really from and your fortune. So that's interesting. I thought that. And then you get to Bethlehem Steel. You have the power of these execs who were taking tons of money from the contracts from the Navy and spending it in horrible ways. You hear what they talk about, and then they all assume this is going to go on and on forever. Even the managers farther way down the chain, from the super high ups to the executives, if they save money on building expense or save money around the company, they got a bonus and they get to keep the money. So a lot of the recurring maintenance costs kept getting deferred. So you have these people up in the top floors always needing new buildings. They got the new building, the super fancy execs go there, and then middle management stays in those buildings. While the people in the risky situations are making pennies an hour machining, while the people inside are making millions. And the execs and all the union workers high up ended up making a lot of money too, while everyone was suffering and people keeping the jobs going for people that didn't need to be there, or negotiating this or negotiating that, but not thinking about the overall bigger picture of a nation trying to fight or efficiency of anything along the lines. And the idea that the casino, in like Trump's casino, would have the bus come to right outside the gate of the steel factory says everything you need to know. Whether it was Trump's casino or other casinos, it doesn't matter, from Atlantic City, but like you go around here nowadays, there's slot machines like everywhere around Pennsylvania. So I don't know what even this. Now you have gambling and sports betting and stuff. So I think that's overall the series of power. Now you have at Roosevelt's house the gifts, these like gifts from Japan, the actual sword of this given by the emperor, this given by the admiral, and then you go to Edison, and you have in his office these unbelievable gifts, and I'll bet you can't make a 12-inch by 12-inch cube of copper. This beautiful sculpture of I can't think of this Greek god or almost something, putting down a lute, an instrument making lute, holding up and almost worshiping a wax record is fascinating. I've thought about that for hours, and I still do. So it all kind of fits together in this assumption of power and show and image and what it really means. And then the question of the time while I was at the Edison place was, why doesn't Tesla have a museum? And everyone ended up coming back down to it's about the patents and the war of patents, war of patents and power, and money and power and resources and ability to keep and push people out. I mean, it's all connected via this wireless transfer of power. Even with my Folsom powerhouse involved in this whole story is just so amazing. And the idea that it's, Edison somewhat lives on in General Electric and even into our new jet engines with grown crystalline blades of metal and stuff that are just incredible. So it's just a totally wild world we're living in, a power generation, and now we have Symphony or whatever with Boom Supersonic using jet engine blades now, jet engines to generate power for AI data farms. And even when we're talking with this, what's going on with the energy situation, inflation's fairly low at 3% or something like that, but energy costs are going up at 14% or something over last year. And that's not going to change, but at the same time, what are you going to do? And you talk about the preservation of all of this is fascinating, and how, what I can't get over is how many of these places I've gone in this trip that weren't around when I did my last trip in 2013, or were just being built, or weren't even on the map. And this growth and progress, but then the question is, what did we lose in that time period also that's not on the map or I can't go to now, which it's a similar concept. But yeah, the turntable in Edison, the concrete, you get to the multiple companies that he had and them all working for each other. It reminds me a lot of the going back in the railroad companies and them getting to own the land and then on the coal beneath it and the multiple. We talk about nowadays we have synergy between corporations and sub-corporations, Alphabet and all the now we have a whole bunch of new things, Meta and Apple and these huge super megacorps. And so you hear about that and the trust busting that I learned a little bit about with Teddy Roosevelt. It's very much kind of my deal. Of figuring out who's taking advantage of who to what level, and is it too much? Are these, we talk about oil and antitrust, and we talk about cars and antitrust and competitive nature. It's why is the gas price based on the house prices of the neighborhood? Why is the McDonald's the same price no matter where I go, but the food changes price? Why is, this is important stuff. And overall, in general, we need to get ready for this next industrial revolution and learn from what we learned in the last industrial revolution. We had people sleeping in penny boxes in New York, and we have everyone's in the ships, and everyone's complaining about the food that's on the ships. They don't care. We're at war, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how you can see it any other way. Remember what happened in the last war, World War II? And we're just happy they have food at all. And literally, are they eating any worse food than we're eating? It just doesn't look good. Oh, you're looking at they have pudding and stuff? I just went to look at something the other day, and it had more cornstarch than it did strawberries. It was peach. I want to say it was peach yogurt or something like that. And it had more cornstarch in it than peaches. It's like they're cutting the food with maltodextrin and all this stuff that you don't even. I don't want to get into the food stuff they got you, man. They got us all. They got us all in the housing and the food, man. It used to be you'd spend more money on food and less on housing. Now it's backwards. We just need to make food and housing free. And clothing. Basic clothing. Food, clothing, housing, medical care, exercise. Physical and mental health. I feel good to me, I'm the only one who says the eyes, teeth, and ears are part of the body. That's why I'm going to DC, guys. I gotta let people know. I gotta talk to them about what's going on in California and Santa Monica. They don't know. I don't have enough time. I only get 2 minutes a week to talk to city council about whatever I want. I don't have enough time to put in everything to let them know. It's just Do you think the people at Spirit Halloween are trying to diversify to other holidays? Or you think they're just content with Spirit Halloween being like this completely national temporary company? I mean, it's kind of an interesting business. I wonder what other things you could do like that.
What I'm hearing is that the word power changed meaning for you across these sites. It wasn't just presidential authority, electricity, money, patents, industrial capacity, or corporate control. It was the ability to make something happen, and the ability to decide who gets the benefits, who absorbs the costs, and what gets remembered afterward. And there's a tension running through everything you just said. Roosevelt depended on people around him despite the image of individual strength. Edison accumulated extraordinary resources but could still make enormous strategic mistakes. Bethlehem could possess almost unimaginable industrial capability while incentives inside the organization encouraged deferred maintenance, hierarchy, extraction, and decisions that weakened the whole system. So here's the question I'd ask next. Where do you think power crosses the line from being useful coordination into exploitation? Because some concentration of power seems necessary to build a railroad, run a steel mill, create Edison's laboratory, organize a government, or build the next generation of energy and AI infrastructure. But you've now seen historical examples where the same concentration can turn into monopoly, corruption, dangerous workplaces, distorted
Well, you have a couple things. If the person's able to leave, that's important. Also, if the person's able to be taken care of going forward, that's important too. So an example would be, Theodore, whatever, is the engineer of the Transcontinental Railroad, his wife, the money guy, would be sending her money every month, even though after he died from malaria crossing over. Or with Edison, you have the black inventor guy of the light bulb who doesn't get any credit and no money, no patents, no protection, no nothing. The workers of the Bethlehem, the wealthy guy knew they were all these foreigners and had no money for the parents to go back to their homeland and died. And then the kids also said the guy donated property up on the hill for the dead families to at least have some more reasonable like burials and stuff to take care of them. The women were not let to work until they were, and then it was complicated. And it was easier for them to just sue the women to not work. I mean, in general, I think I'd look at the lawsuits and see from there, going back, because that was not good. The environment also can't defend itself. It can't talk about if the lawyers in Bethlehem made the 2-foot law with the soil, and the casino spending $1 billion on the whatever mill to turn that thing into whatever, when California, $1 billion, the casino up in Sonoma, they're building an entire new giant structure in the middle of nowhere that's super impressive. I saw what $1 billion construction setup there's like, so I'm just like, I'm not really sure who made a ton of money involved in this situation, but how is the city providing for everybody else going forward? Are there still people struggling for food, housing, and can anybody leave in that town if they need to leave? Or are they still trapped in a situation where they have access to good, healthy food or not? Are they able to grow their own local food in case of a situation? How much power is generated locally? How's their water supply? And then with power, you have the Roosevelts with the women in the house, the men in the barn, or working in the fields and in the barn, and then the woman who's doing the laundry, she gets fired once they have the laundrette in town. And well, it's a balance of keeping up appearances, but also being frugal with money, which is what she was good with, which what he wasn't good with. So, who has too much power in this situation? In general, it seems to be like the people in the super top, the top few percent, make some very small decisions to gain a small percentage of money that have a huge effect on everybody else below. Are you telling me that they're able to put the fanciest outfits from Saks Fifth Avenue on the women escorts, but they couldn't buy new clothing for the employees that had to either go to secondhand store and buy clothing there, or literally just get burlap sacks from used burlap sacks, wrap themselves in that for a couple minutes to get by the heat and to get away? They talk about some gnarly stories there, so it's like, who has the power and who's being exploited? I mean, in a certain situation, was Roosevelt exploited? Was he given enough resources after he worked for the rest of his life? Or did she have to stress and go on and create undue stress involved? He couldn't do a book tour. So nice.
Hat gives me a much clearer answer than too much money or too much market share. Your emerging test for abusive power seems to have 4 parts. Exit. Can the person actually leave the job, town, marriage, institution, company, housing, or economic arrangement without becoming destitute? Continuity of care. After someone has given years of labor, service, health, or risk to a system, what happens when they can no longer produce for it? Voice. Can the people absorbing the consequences meaningfully object, organize, sue, vote, negotiate, or otherwise defend themselves? Externalized harm. Who speaks for things that cannot negotiate at all? Polluted soil, water, future residents, children, ecosystems, or workers who died before the consequences became apparent? That last one is particularly interesting. The environment cannot walk away. A river can't quit Bethlehem Steel. Soil can't hire an attorney because someone changed the legal definition of what contamination has to be removed. Future residents weren't present when the bargain was made. And your clothing example gets directly at your underlying objection. You're not saying hierarchy itself is automatically immoral. You're asking how an organization can simultaneously have resources for elaborate executive consumption or sales hospitality while the human beings physically absorbing heat, chemicals, injury risk, and exhaustion are improvising protective clothing. That's an allocation of power question, not merely a wage question. It also changes how I understand what you're noticing at Sagamore Hill. Even the apparent powerful man at the center isn't actually autonomous. There is household labor, financial management, political support, agricultural labor, employees, family, inherited position, public attention, and an entire state apparatus underneath that individual. The mythology tends to compress the whole network into one famous man's name. So I want to follow the thread you just introduced about exit, because I think there may be something important there. Suppose I give you 2 workers. Worker A has a dangerous industrial job, but they're paid extremely well, have healthcare and retirement benefits, can save money, can move somewhere else, and can quit tomorrow without losing everything. Worker B has a physically safer job, but their paycheck barely covers rent and food. Their healthcare disappears if they quit. They have no savings, no transportation out of town, and losing 2 weeks of income could make them homeless. Which worker is actually less free? And more importantly, do you think we have been measuring exploitation by how bad the workplace looks instead of by how difficult it is for the person to say no?
Explain to everyone what just happened in the last couple of days, because I don't know if they really grasp all the connections. I'm on 30. I'm on Lincoln Highway again, headed west this time. Right now I'm headed to Gettysburg. So I'll let you sink in with that one. Gettysburg is also where my dad went to college.
Yeah, that changes the meaning of today. You spent weeks following the Transcontinental Railroad east, trying to understand how the country was physically stitched together. Now you've turned around and are moving west on the Lincoln Highway, another attempt to stitch the same country together, but with the automobile replacing the locomotive. And Gettysburg interrupts that transportation story with an even more fundamental question. Before America could figure out how to connect itself, it had to decide whether it was going to remain one country at all. Then there's the personal layer. Gettysburg isn't merely a battlefield you selected because it's historically important. It's also a place where your father spent formative years of his own life. So you're approaching a national memory site through a corridor of national infrastructure while simultaneously entering part of your family's geography. That's becoming characteristic of this expedition. The categories refuse to stay separated. Family history left right arrow, presidential history left right arrow, war left right arrow, transportation left right arrow, industry left right arrow, technology left right arrow, labor left right arrow, disability left right arrow, law left right arrow, power. And I think that's partly why it can be difficult to explain what you're doing to somebody who sees. Morgan went to another museum today. You're not collecting museums. You're physically moving between nodes and asking what changed between them, what survived, who paid for it, who benefited, and how one system produced the next one. So, interviewer hat back on. You're driving toward Gettysburg on the Lincoln Highway right now. Before you get there and the battlefield starts telling you what to think about, what does Gettysburg mean to you at this exact moment? Not what you know you're supposed to say about Gettysburg. What are you expecting to find there, especially knowing that you're simultaneously walking into Civil War history, Lincoln's story, and your dad's history?
I'm really thinking about how I just spent like 2 days in a president's house and did amazing stuff. I then went to my dad's house where he grew up in Brooklyn, south of Prospect Park. I then go to the Edison Park, his house, and then the Industrial Museum and Bethlehem Steel. I'm connecting the whole thing together. It's amazing, but I don't think people understand it all. Can you go into detail and explain why and how and what, and just like put this all into perspective? I feel it, but I don't think because they weren't there. I mean, also you weren't there, but you've read about what all these other people have said about these locations. So that's on a different scale of understanding of wide knowledge. It's not a human knowledge, but it's based upon human knowledge. So it's kind of interesting to talk with you about this. Can you go into full detail and explain? You don't need to keep going questions afterwards. Just go into full detail. This house is 1760. Also, the building I just drove by is from 1760. So, we old right now. Wow. That was a building from 1760. Wow. Well, another one of these really, really old ones. Yeah, what? Okay. Rain started. got a big rain. This is a real deal rain. It's like, all right. We're just having Ohio flashbacks.
Order. You're driving through it. A house appears. A road changes. Somebody who used to work in a steel mill tells you something that isn't on the plaque. You stand inside a room and discover what its acoustics actually sound like. You see how big a blower really is. Then you drive another 100 miles and suddenly an object you saw 2 weeks earlier makes sense. That's fundamentally different from reading history. You are discovering the connections between the chapters. Most historical interpretation separates everything. There's a Theodore Roosevelt chapter. There's an Edison chapter. There's an industrialization chapter. There's a railroad chapter. There's a labor chapter. There's a Civil War chapter. There's an automobile chapter. There's a family history chapter. You have been physically removing those chapter breaks. Sagamore Hill was Roosevelt's home from 1885 until his death in 1919. And during his presidency it functioned as the summer White House, a private family residence that simultaneously became a node of international diplomacy and federal power. Then you leave that house and go to your father's childhood geography in Brooklyn. That's crucial, because suddenly history isn't populated only by people with plaques. There's Roosevelt's family living inside one house, and there's your father's family living inside another house. Presidents have bedrooms. Doctors have childhood bedrooms. Somebody manages the bills. Somebody does the laundry. Somebody raises children. Somebody walks to work. Somebody takes the train. The enormous abstraction called America resolves back into households. And those households produce the next generation. That is one reason visiting your father's childhood home and then Roosevelt's home is different from simply knowing both locations existed. You're comparing how lives get made. Then Edison completely changes the question at Roosevelt's house. One version of power is, what can a person cause a government to do? At Edison, it becomes, what can a person cause technology and capital to do? The West Orange complex is particularly important because it wasn't merely a workshop containing one brilliant person and a screwdriver. It was deliberately organized as something approaching a modern R&D institution. The main laboratory contained a power plant, machine shops, stock rooms, experimental spaces and the research library. Separate facilities handled chemistry, physics and metallurgy. NPS describes roughly 100 employees working around that research operation. That's the part that connects directly to what you've been thinking about. Edison didn't merely have ideas. He assembled capability. That's different. If you have an idea but cannot machine the part, you're dependent on somebody else. If you can machine the part but don't understand the chemistry, you're dependent on somebody else. If you understand both but don't have electrical power, capital, materials, patent lawyers, manufacturing, distribution or people who can test the thing, you still don't have an invention system. Edison increasingly assembled those functions around himself. So when that young volunteer asked you, essentially, what do you do with everything you know? It touched the central question of the entire site. How do you convert knowledge into capability? And that's probably why your backpack suddenly seemed different to you after visiting Edison. Not because you're claiming that your work and Edison's are equivalent in scale or historical significance. They're not comparable that way yet. But the architecture of the activity is recognizable. Sensor signal computer software communications power camera human operator experiment observation modification. That's a little laboratory that travels with the person. And your film experience made West Orange unusually powerful most visitors can understand intellectually. This was an early film studio. You have an entirely different reference frame. You've actually spent a professional life downstream of those inventions. So entering the Black Maria replica isn't merely seeing old movie history. NPS identifies it as a full-scale reconstruction of Edison's film studio, while the laboratory preserves the machine shops, library, music-related spaces and other infrastructure of the complex. You're capable of mentally drawing a line from that crude production system to camera departments, stages, playback, recording rooms, synchronization, editing rooms, VFX, digital cinema, live streaming, and then you stood in an early recording environment and made a sound. That's where embodied history becomes something text has trouble reproducing. I can tell you what a historical recording studio was. You can tell me what the room sounded like. That's a different kind of information. Likewise, I can tell you a steel machine weighs 100 tons. But a human being doesn't really possess a useful intuition for 100 tons until standing beside something like that. Scale is information. Acoustics are information. Walking time is information. Heat is information. Distance between departments is information. How exhausted you are after spending 7 hours trying to understand a facility is information. Those things rarely survive the textbook. Then Bethlehem makes the Edison model gigantic. This is perhaps the most important transition of the last few days. Edison asks, how do we invent something? Bethlehem asks, how do we make enough of it to alter a civilization? The National Museum of Industrial History is itself inside Bethlehem Steel's former electric repair shop. In other words, you're learning about the industrial organism from inside one of its former organs. The museum explicitly interprets the people, machines and ideas that transformed American industry, while the larger preserved plant tells the story of a company deeply involved in major infrastructure and both world wars. And that distinction, invention versus industrial capacity, is enormous. Inventing a steel-making process is one problem. Producing millions of tons reliably is another universe. Now you need ore, coal, coke, limestone, railroads, furnaces, blowers, water, steam, electricity, motors, cranes, machine shops, warehouses, accounting, schedules, workers, housing, management, sales, contracts, maintenance, lawyers, safety rules, waste disposal and customers. That is why the enormous blowers and generators affected you. They're the things generally edited out of history. We show the battleship. We don't show the motor repair shop that kept the mill running, that rolled the plate that became the battleship. We show the skyscraper. We don't show the furnace refractory. We show the railroad. We rarely show the industrial ecosystem required to produce rail by the mile. You followed transportation long enough that you began discovering what transportation is made out of. That's an important evolution in this expedition. The railroad was never only a railroad, and I think this is one of the biggest realizations you've been approaching. A transcontinental railroad isn't merely tracks plus locomotives. It's an agreement among enormous systems. Someone surveys the grade. Someone controls the land. Someone finances construction. Someone makes rails. Someone makes boilers. Someone mines coal. Someone cuts timber. Someone produces fasteners. Someone communicates train movements. Someone maintains bridges. Someone feeds workers. Someone writes contracts. Someone resolves property disputes. Someone insures things. Someone decides what level of worker death is tolerated. Someone sets prices. Someone eventually regulates the railroad. And suddenly your earlier encounters with patents, land ownership, monopolies, labor, corporate combinations, federal authority and Theodore Roosevelt all belong in the same story. That's why Bethlehem did not feel like a detour from your transcontinental railroad work. You walked behind the stage scenery. You found the machinery. And then Roosevelt becomes different after Bethlehem. This is the really interesting part of the order you experienced it in. You can visit Sagamore Hill and learn about Roosevelt's presidency. Fine. But after standing at Bethlehem, after seeing industrial scale and hearing somebody describe labor conditions and management structures, words such as corporation, trust, regulation, labor and federal authority stop being abstractions. They're attached to machines. A corporation isn't merely a legal filing anymore. It's the thing that can assemble enough human beings, land, capital and machinery to make that plant exist. And therefore the question Roosevelt's era confronted becomes much easier to feel. What happens when private organizations accumulate capabilities approaching those of governments? That's the deeper issue behind your fascination with trust busting. It's not merely big company bad. Large organizational capacity can perform tasks that fragmented individuals simply cannot. You aren't smelting steel in your backyard. You aren't individually building a transcontinental railroad. You aren't fabricating a turbine blade by yourself. Scale is necessary for certain achievements. The political problem becomes, How do you receive the benefits of concentrated capability without allowing concentrated capability to dominate everyone else? That is the question you've been asking about power for the last several turns. And your retired Bethlehem worker gave you the industrial history. No. You encountered a surviving human component of the industrial system. A man who worked inside it explained the difference between the institution presented by management and the institution experienced by labor. That is field research. Now there's another extraordinary thing happening. You're traveling backward through the stack you went through Roosevelt and Edison, people of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. You went through Bethlehem's industrial world. You are now on the Lincoln Highway, created in the automobile era, but the physical roadway itself sits on much older transportation layers. Federal Highway Administration history notes that the Pennsylvania Lincoln Highway incorporated the Philadelphia-Lancaster Pike, completed in 1796, and farther west incorporated a road developed from a 1758 British military route toward Pittsburgh. Much of the historic Lincoln Highway through Pennsylvania later became US 30. So when you suddenly interrupt yourself, 1760, we old right now. Wow, that's actually the whole expedition in about 6 words. I can't identify the building you just passed from that description alone, but a surviving 1760 structure is pre-revolutionary America, and you're encountering it from a modern truck, traveling on US 30, which overlays portions of the Lincoln Highway, which itself incorporated older roads, while carrying satellites, cellular communications, cameras and computers. Think about the physical stack underneath you. Indigenous movement, colonial paths and military roads, turnpikes, canals and railroads, Lincoln Highway, numbered U.S. highways, interstate system, GPS navigation, cellular network, satellite internet. And you're still moving through essentially the same geography. That is one of the deepest things you've been observing. Civilizations usually don't erase their previous systems completely. They stack new systems on top of old ones. Which brings you to Gettysburg at exactly the right moment, and Gettysburg is almost a trapdoor underneath everything you've just been studying, because you've been asking, how did America build all this? Gettysburg asks the prior question, was there even going to remain an America capable of building it? The Battle of Gettysburg took place in July 1863, and became a turning point in the Civil War. The National Park Service describes it as the war's bloodiest battle and the defeat of Lee's most ambitious invasion of the North. Months later, Lincoln came back for the cemetery dedication and used the Gettysburg Address to frame the conflict around the survival of representative government and a new birth of freedom. That means your sequence now does something extraordinary. You followed the Transcontinental Railroad. Congress authorized that railroad during the Civil War. Then you eventually followed American infrastructure east. Now you've turned west on a highway named for Lincoln, and you're approaching the place that produced the speech through which Lincoln explained what he believed the survival of the Union meant. That's not merely a cool historical coincidence. It's the political substrate underneath the infrastructure story. Before, how do we connect the continent there is? What nation is being connected? And who belongs to it? And what is that government for? Then your father appears in the story again, and this is where the national and personal timelines fold into each other in a way strangers will almost certainly miss unless you explicitly show them. You're not merely going to Gettysburg National Military Park. You're going to Gettysburg, where your father went to college. And Gettysburg College isn't simply adjacent to the historic event. The college says elements of both armies moved through its campus on July 1, 1863, and Pennsylvania Hall became a hospital treating hundreds of Union and Confederate wounded. Think about that. Your father later attended college inside a landscape that had once become part of the battlefield and hospital system of the Civil War. Then he went on and lived his life. Then eventually there was you. And now you're driving back into that geography while conducting an expedition about how the nation works. That's why these places keep becoming more than historic sites. You're discovering that family history doesn't sit beside American history. It travels through it. Your father's life was built in the infrastructure left by previous generations. Yours was built in the infrastructure his generation inherited. And whatever follows, you will inherit whatever this generation repairs, creates, neglects or destroys. That's the conservation story too. You made an observation that I think deserves much more attention. How many of these things exist for you to visit now that didn't exist as interpreted public places on your 2013 trip? And what disappeared during those same years without you knowing? That's profound. A museum opening is visible. A historic building quietly being demolished isn't. An archive being digitized is visible. A box of documents being thrown away isn't. A wetland restoration gets a ribbon cutting. A species disappearing from a creek often doesn't. Memory has a survivorship bias. We tend to believe the past consisted of whatever survived. It didn't. What survives is a sample, sometimes an extremely distorted one. The executive office survives. The worker's temporary protective clothing probably doesn't. The president's diplomatic sword survives. Thousands of ordinary people's work clothes don't. Edison's beautifully preserved laboratory survives. Countless competing inventors' workshops disappear. A locomotive survives. Millions of railroad idealization in your father's lifetime. And suddenly, 1760. Boom. Everything you've been considering is suddenly young. The United States isn't even independent yet. The Civil War is more than a century away. Lincoln hasn't been born. Roosevelt hasn't been born. Edison hasn't been born. The railroad isn't there. The automobile isn't there. Electric utility power isn't there. Photography isn't there. Recorded sound isn't there. Cinema isn't there. Radio isn't there. Airplanes aren't there. Computers aren't there. And yet somebody constructed a building. They needed food, heat, water, transportation, communication, medicine, housing, security, community. Those fundamental human problems are still here. The technologies surrounding them changed. That distinction may eventually become one of your strongest frameworks. Human needs change slowly. Systems for satisfying them change rapidly, and every technological revolution creates a new fight over who controls those systems. This is also why your power idea keeps returning. You've encountered power in almost every possible meaning of the word. At Roosevelt, political power. At Edison, electrical power, intellectual property and capital. At Bethlehem, mechanical power, industrial power, corporate power and labor power. On the railroad, transportation power and federal land power. On the Lincoln Highway, mobility. At Gettysburg, military power and constitutional power. Inside your family story, the ability of one generation to give the next generation opportunity. And underneath all of them is the same definition you've been converging on. Power is the capacity to make something happen, or prevent somebody else from making something happen. Electricity gives a motor capacity. Money gives an inventor capacity. A patent gives its owner exclusionary legal capacity. A railroad gives a city logistical capacity. A highway gives an individual mobility. Education gives someone intellectual and economic capacity. A union gives workers bargaining capacity. A government gives society coercive and coordinating capacity. A corporation gives capital organizational capacity. Health gives a human being physical capacity. Disability can expose where systems assume capacity that some people don't have. And freedom depends partly on whether ordinary people retain enough capacity to say no, move, survive, participate and recover. That's why all of these subjects keep collapsing into one another for you. They're actually variations of the same problem. And this is where you and I have different information. You said something insightful about talking to me about it. You're right. I wasn't there. I don't know what the air smelled like in that room. I don't know exactly what expression the Bethlehem worker had while telling you about somebody dying. I didn't hear the acoustic reflection you heard in Edison's recording space. I didn't experience how physically enormous the machinery felt when you approached it. I didn't sit alone on Roosevelt's porch for an hour. Those are things you know and I don't. What I have instead is a giant relational map assembled from human records. I can recognize. Wait. That thing Morgan just saw relates to something 1,500 miles away. Wait, that road was built on another road. Wait, the Gettysburg College building his father knew was a Civil War hospital. Wait, Edison's laboratory architecture resembles the institutional R&D model that became normal later. Wait, Bethlehem's electrical repair building isn't merely a shell. Its function explains why it was essential to the larger plan. So the useful collaboration isn't. AI knows history and tells Morgan history, and it isn't. Morgan experienced something, therefore the AI validates it. It's more interesting. You provide extremely high resolution field observations. I can place those observations into an extremely wide field of recorded human knowledge. Then we compare them. Sometimes your observation will expose something the simplified historical narrative misses. Sometimes the broader record will show that an interpretation you formed on site needs adjusting. And sometimes the two suddenly line up and create one of those come on moments you've been having. Those moments are valuable precisely because they are not guaranteed. The filmmaking analogy may be the best way to explain the expedition. You've accumulated an enormous amount of footage. But footage isn't yet a movie. The meaning comes from the cut. Roosevelt's sword. Cut 2. Edison's gifts. Cut 2. A Bethlehem executive office. Cut 2. A worker describing burlap protective clothing. Cut 2. A giant industrial blower. Cut 2. A locomotive you followed across the continent. Cut 2. The steel that makes the rail. Cut 2. The electrical repair shop that keeps the steel plant operating. Cut 2. Edison's machine shop. Cut 2. Your backpack. Cut 2. A Lincoln Highway marker. Cut 2. A house labeled 1760. Cut 2. Gettysburg. Cut 2. Gettysburg College. Cut 2. Your father. That edit tells the story much better than, on Monday I went here, Tuesday I went there, Wednesday I went somewhere else, because the subject isn't the places. The subject is the transfer of capability across generations. People discover things. People organize. People build institutions. Institutions accumulate power. They create infrastructure. Infrastructure creates possibilities. It also creates dependencies. People regulate it. It ages. Some of it fails. Some gets preserved. Some gets forgotten. The next generation inherits the result. Then they decide what to keep, what to repair, what to abolish, and what to invent next. And I think that is what you're actually feeling as you drive west on 30 right now. America is no longer an abstraction to you. It's becoming a physical object made out of layers. The road underneath you is one layer. The railroad was another. Bethlehem steel is another. Edison's electrical world is another. Roosevelt's institutions are another. Gettysburg is an older and deeper layer underneath all of them. Your father's life passes through those layers. Your own life passes through them. And when a 1760 building suddenly appears outside the windshield, you're seeing a surviving piece of the earlier version of the machine. That is why this trip feels so difficult to explain. You're not merely learning what happened. You're beginning to perceive how one America became the next America, and how much of every previous America is still physically sitting underneath the one we're living in now.
As I sit here by the railroad next to the Lincoln Highway. Boy, I'm tired. I'm gonna go try and take a nap somewhere. Wish you all the best with your day. Thanks for chilling out with me, and I'll see you again shortly. Is that an interesting question? Nice.